Surviving Hell, What Really Happens in the Toughest U.S. Jails. I subscribe for more true crime. Like, comment, and help uncover the truth with us. They found him in his cell at dawn. The door was cracked open by guards. Khalif Browder lay silent, alone. After years held at Rikers Island without trial, isolated in lockups, beaten by inmates and guards alike. His room smelled of sweat and stale air. The bunk sheets were twisted. On the wall, scribbled prayers and pleas. No one heard a fight. No one saw someone walk in. All that remained was his body and the question: how did the boy who fought so hard simply vanish into the system? This moment became a spark that exposed what really happens behind bars. But before that final tragedy, there was a long, winding road built from injustice, fear, and silence. Khalif was only 16 when police arrested him for allegedly stealing a backpack in the Bronx. He pled not guilty, but because he couldn't afford bail, $3,000 then raised higher, he was sent to Rikers to await trial. That simple inability to pay changed everything. He was not a hardened criminal. He was a kid stuck in a brutal maze. Wikipedia. Inside Rikers, conditions were terrible. Inmates described overcrowded dorms, too few guards, and violence ruled the halls. Guards were stretched thin. Inmates were left to enforce order themselves. Fights broke out constantly. Stabbings, shanks, extortion. Every block felt like its own war zone. Vera Institute of Justice. Khalif was beaten many times by other prisoners, sometimes pushed down, cuffed, forced into solitary. Once in 2012, security camera footage showed officers pushing him to the floor while his hands were cuffed. Time. Day after day, he slept on top of his clothes, sleeping on his bucket so he wouldn't be attacked in the night. He took pull-ups, trying to become bigger, stronger, blending in so he wouldn't be an EA. Stay target. Wikipedia. He kept silence when he could. He refused to snitch. He stayed quiet about beatings. When it came to survival, silence was his only tool. But in those quiet, painful seconds, cracks began to show. Some guards ignored his injuries. Some nights, Barry, another inmate, would whisper, "You're losing your mind." Khalif began slipping. He asked for medical help, but often none came. Sometimes medical records were falsified. Sometimes he was left waiting days to be seen. He waited, bleeding, hurt, holding on to some hope that justice would come. But as the days turned into months, that hope dimmed. Then, one night in his solitary cell, Khalif stood by the door and screamed. No guard replied. He raged at empty walls. The cell echoed. No one came. He fell silent again, alone in darkness. And sometime later they found him, a body. But the system that failed him remained standing. That discovery ignited outrage. People whispered a name. His story would force the city to confront the brutal truth. In America's toughest jails, you can disappear without ever being convicted. But what lay behind those walls? What twisted the system to allow it? That's where the real horror begins. The news spread like wildfire across New York. Teen dies after years on Rikers Island without trial. Headlines painted Khalif Browder as the symbol of a broken system. But inside the Bronx courthouse, prosecutors quietly closed his case, filing the paperwork as if nothing had happened. To them, it was just another name, another inmate lost to time. For the people who had seen what Rikers really was, it was proof that something far darker was buried inside the city's jail system. Khalif's story began forcing questions no one wanted to answer. How could a teenager spend 3 years behind bars without ever being convicted of a crime? How could someone endure 2 years of solitary confinement without a single guilty verdict? His mother, Venida Browder, appeared on camera, holding her son's photo and shaking hands. "He came back," she said softly, "but he wasn't the same. Rikers broke him." Her eyes carried the weight of every parent who'd lost a child to the system. Investigators began looking into Rikers Island more closely. What they found shocked even veteran officers. Overcrowding had turned the jail into chaos. Cells built for one man now held 3. Violence was constant. Guards overworked, underpaid, and sometimes corrupted by fear. Inmates carried makeshift weapons and gangs ran the dormitories. Officers who tried to intervene were often outnumbered. Medical neglect, falsified reports, and retaliation for complaints were all part of the routine. For many, survival depended on silence. One former corrections officer confessed in an interview years later, "It wasn't a jail, it was a battlefield. You just tried to make it to the end of your shift without someone dying." Reports from the Department of Justice confirmed it. Routine beatings, denied medical care, psychological abuse. Inmates were treated as problems to be managed, not people to be helped. Caliph's case became the catalyst. Activists, lawyers, and journalists rallied. Footage from surveillance cameras showing him beaten by guards surfaced in public. It sparked outrage across the country. The mayor promised reforms. The governor spoke out. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't one man's tragedy. It was the symptom of something far more systemic. In 2017, after months of public pressure, officials announced plans to shut down Rikers Island completely. The decision was historic, a sign that Caliph's death might finally bring change. Yet, many inside the system doubted it would happen. The same culture of neglect had been there for decades. How could one promise undo it? And then came another shock. Just as reform efforts began, reports leaked that violence in Rikers had actually increased. Inmates were dying again, faster than before. Guards quitting in record numbers. As it seemed like the ghost of Rikers refused to die. But no one knew that the next revelation, hidden files, missing reports, and a secret list of unreported inmate deaths would expose something far worse than anyone had imagined. The leaked documents hit the newsroom like a thunderclap. Reporters unfolded pages of internal memos stamped confidential, files the Department of Correction never intended for the public to see. Within those pages were the names of inmates who had vanished from official records, listed as transfers or releases. But they were never seen again. Buried deep in the notes were autopsy reports, unfiled complaints, and hundreds of ignored letters from prisoners crying for help. The truth was undeniable. Rikers Island hadn't just failed. It had hidden its failures. Federal investigators reopened their probe. Former officers were called in for questioning. One of them, his voice trembling, told the truth. "We were told to keep quiet. If we reported too much violence, they'd say we couldn't handle our jobs. So we stopped reporting." His statement became the turning point. It wasn't just negligence. It was a system designed to protect itself, not the people inside it. Families of victims began demanding justice. They filled courthouse steps with photos of sons, daughters, brothers, and fathers who never came home. The city's silence broke when footage from inside a Rikers cafeteria surfaced. A correctional officer walking past a group of starving inmates eating food covered in mold. The image spread across the nation, and public outrage turned into a movement. Congressional hearings followed. For the first time, officials from the New York City Department of Correction sat under oath, facing tough questions from both sides of the aisle. "How," one senator asked, "can the United States of America allow a place like Rikers Island to exist in the 21st century?" The room fell silent. There were no good answers. By 2022, Rikers Island had become a symbol of everything broken within the criminal justice system. Overcrowding, corruption. The mayor finally announced the closure would begin within years, replaced by smaller community-based jails. But for families like the Browders, it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. In the final scene of this story, Khalif's mother stood beside his grave, the city skyline in the distance. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deep. You can close Rikers, but you can't bring back the ones it destroyed. The camera slowly pulled back, showing hundreds of candles flickering in the dark, each one representing an inmate who never made it out. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sound of distant city sirens. And as the light faded, the screen filled with the final words, "Justice delayed is justice denied." But silence is what keeps it alive. If this case stunned you, the next one will haunt you. Subscribe for what's coming.